So to date, there have been more than 1,700 COVID-19 related deaths in Chicago proper, with more than 37,000 cases reported. And then statewide in Illinois, more than 4,000 deaths have been recorded and almost 100,000 cases. On March 16th, your organization closed its facilities, and like all of us, you have been living in a new reality. Now, your service area extends to multiple counties in the Chicago metro area. Dick, would you walk us through some of the immediate challenges you faced after closing?
Yes, of course. Thank you. First of all, it's great to be here, and it's good to see you all. I'm happy to be joined here by Denise Lam, our Chief Operating Officer. On March 16th, when we closed our doors, it was just a sense that things were coming that way, and we had a sense that things were going to turn into a situation where we would have to close our doors. And since that time, it's been devastating in our community. You mentioned the infection and death rates in the Chicagoland area. And as I'm sure you know, the high rates of infection are happening in the communities that are the highest rates of crime and violence in Chicago as well. These are the same communities that are least able to recover from the devastation of the disease and death. And in fact, statistics show now that the African American population in Chicago have 6 times higher rate of death in Chicago than for whites. So clearly there's an issue at hand that we have to deal with. And at the Y, immediately closing after the 16th, we wanted to jump in and do the best we could to lessen the impact on vulnerable people. On the other hand, we had to wrestle with the new reality that all of our revenue had instantly vanished overnight. So within the first few hours of closing, we did work with the city of Chicago and were able to, in a very short time frame, convert some gyms to unsheltered housing for folks who were temporarily displaced or homeless. And that was a big need in the community because unsheltered folks need a place to create distance between themselves and social distance, and we needed to provide some expansion space for that. So the Y was able to do that. Also, in the days that followed, we were distributing face masks, diapers, cleaning supplies, food, even laptops to the community. And we were also engaged in remote early childhood education, instruction, and team mentoring through our violence prevention program. But at the same time, we had our own internal crisis to manage. Our challenge right now is to figure out how to survive after furloughing more than 2,000 people, and as we stand to lose millions of dollars in the shutdown. And we're grateful for the outpouring of support, which I'm standing to look at, and uncertain recovery as we move forward.
You mentioned having to furlough 2,000 folks. What share of your total staffing, or how do you think of that relative to the org staff?
Yeah, it's about 95% of our staff.
So almost everybody.
Right.
Yeah, that's I'm sure just every day hard on many levels. When you think about the greater community impact and what the Y can do in this moment, you mentioned sharing the gym space, et cetera. Are there other things that you have been collaborating with fellow organizations in Chicago around?
Yeah, it's been amazing actually that we have, there are many other providers of early childhood education as we do. We're one of the largest in Chicago. And it was rather amazing, heartwarming in a way to see that all these other organizations who are in the same space came together very quickly to figure out how we could sustain what's happening in our community, to make sure that we're doing as much outreach we could do in a safe manner and within the guidelines set by the CDC, the state of Illinois, and the city of Chicago. So in these kinds of times of crisis, we all come together and do the best we can to collaborate, share best practices, protocols, that sort of thing, and to move forward to help our community.
Denise, you've had to dramatically shift the way you do almost everything, but as Dick was just saying, some of these needs that you filled on a day-to-day basis have continued to, they remain, they haven't gone away. Childcare for essential workers being one example. What's been the biggest learning from your organization's ability to manage this pivot thus far?
Thank you for the question, Victor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So for more than 175 years, the Y has lived by the core value, which is to meet the social need in the community. And the impact of the pandemic is like nothing we've ever seen before. And so it really had a very severe and sudden operating and financial impact on our organization. So like Dick said, we officially closed the door on March 16 to our members. And I think as a YMCA professional, there's simply no worse than telling our highly valuable staff that people who deliver our missions and our core value on an everyday basis, that their roles are being impacted by an event that's completely outside of their control. So I think, you know, as I reflect on this situation, there are two key learnings that I really have found is, first is that the leadership skills are very important more than ever in this stressful and uncertain time. There's really no playbook for leadership when the stakes are high and you know, in this 21st century pandemic. And while we may not have all the answers, and it is really, I think, the board and the senior leadership team's responsibility to be really candid, very authentic, vulnerable, humble, and be hopeful to our staff and the people we serve. I think not only our staff look to us for some stability, but our communities too. And Dick talked a lot about a lot of the services that we have, and from, you know, government agencies to other partner organizations and the community members that we serve, they really look to the Y to be the stable force. I think the second learnings that we found is that we need to be very flexible, adaptive, and be willing to make difficult choices. Things are changing on a daily or even hourly basis. And, you know, today's realities are quite different than what we learned yesterday, and definitely vastly different than what we were told last week. So we don't really have a crystal ball, and we're, you know, really all the team members are wearing different hats at the same time, from figuring out the community's immediate needs and how we can, the Y, to fill the gap, to planning on, you know, online content for the kids and families to do to keep them active during this time, to figuring out what the summer is going to look like, how we can safely reopen our doors, to what the new normal is going to be like in 6 months. So, and you know, quite honestly, how the Y can continue to stay sustainable, you know, in the future. So I think it's really critical that for us to be very flexible and be willing to be, you know, wearing multiple hats. And I think one of my colleagues said, you know, holding many hot plates, but not get yourself burned.
It's a good metaphor. But how do you, so you said every day the reality changes, the set of data, the sense of when you might be able to reopen. You know, I don't know if the city's released yet a reopening plan, but how do you take in all of this information as an organization and yet remain agile to the changing nature of the situation? Are there any practices that have kept you grounded as a leadership team in the midst of this? And I'm curious how you manage expectations of your teams that have been furloughed, given that you can't predict when this will end.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. There, you know, the governor of Illinois has a 5-phase Restore Illinois plan, and we're currently in phase 2 of flattening the curve phase, and still stay at home. And you know, there are the Illinois Department of Public Health has different benchmarks that, you know, kind of as a guidance in terms of when the state will be able to move to the next phase. And so, of course, we, you know, the team really closely monitor that. And, you know, and as Dick said, you know, we are actively engaged with the City of Chicago and State of Illinois emergency response, team, and we actually have an office in there, in the building, and to really actively, participating and supporting not just the city but also the state's needs, and also help us plan for the reopening. There are also other Ys across the country that has reopened because the state has moved on to the next phase, and my team and I have been regularly having conversation with them and learning from there, how the reopening looks like as well.
Yeah, that's great. So that's one of the benefits of being part of a network. Speaking of that network, according to media reports, the Ys have lost $400 million in the month of April alone. And independent sector, along with the Y of the USA and other advocates, has been fighting to get more relief to organizations. Can you say something about what kind of impact additional federal funding would have for you in your work in Chicago?
Sure. Yeah. As Denise said, we are very fortunate to be part of a wide network with YUSA leading the charge, and with all the other Ys helping and advocating for more funds. That has been very helpful. And of course, we have a national office too that helps us with fundraising as well. Neil Denton, who you may even know. But you mentioned the $400 million in the month of April alone, and I spoke to the folks at YUSA this morning, and they're predicting that those losses could easily exceed $1.5 million before this is all over.
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion with a B.
Wow.
And that's a nonprofit organization whose sole purpose is to serve the community, of course. And so, when you look at nonprofits like ourselves, especially the large nonprofits like Metro Chicago, because we have employees that exceeds 500 employees in total, we are not eligible for the PPP funds under the CARES Act that was passed. And so we've been advocating on a local and state and national basis to try to see if we could get some more funds loosened up. And so, although we understand the importance of small businesses, and we're glad that the Fed stepped in, we think what Congress failed to understand is that the large nonprofits like us are very different from large for-profit enterprises. For example, we don't deliver profits to shareholders or investors. Our reason for existing, our overarching goal is to direct many resources as we can back into services for the community where it's desperately needed.
But you're part of that safety net for small business owners, for childcare, for their staff, for the owners themselves, and so this strange bifurcation, of sectors
Exactly.
of the economy, or not realizing the way we're interconnected.
Yep.
In important ways.
And I think down the road we're going to be needed even more, even after this pandemic, gets past the critical point. I think that's when nonprofits like ours are going to be desperately needed.
Have the federal aid efforts to date helped out in any way in the situation that you're facing?
Not yet. I mean, on Friday, the House passed a $3 trillion relief package, but nonprofits were excluded from that. This is the HEROES Act that just passed last week. And, we got support in the House, but we believe that the Senate is not going to be supportive of that measure. So we're looking for ways that we can find bipartisan support for organizations like us to be there when this pandemic, peak is over.
And do you have thoughts on what nonprofit leaders ought to be doing in order to build more energy around advocacy for aid and service of the sector?
Well, I think continue to do what we're doing already. We are collaborating with other large nonprofit entities. I mentioned YUSA is a national organization. There's the Red Cross and Boys and Girls Club and Salvation Army. All the other large organizations are coalescing in DC together to lobby. And of course, on a local level, we're doing the best we can to reach out to local legislators, senators and Congress folks that are in our districts, but that we could give information to and tell them the real stories that impact people and why nonprofits are needed to be there to fulfill the widening gap in between the need and the meeting of that need.
Yeah. So anybody that's worked for a nonprofit and with donors knows just deep in their bones how important trust is, how absolutely critical it is to your work, to the ability to deliver the services, but also to help contribute to the general energy and health of civil society as we try to move through this pandemic. I'm curious how you've seen trust manifest itself in the ways that you've shifted operations or in how you engage your communities.
Well, we have, of course, many different stakeholders. I think Denise can talk a little bit about who we're trying to make sure we stay in touch with and the people we serve. But I will tell you that first and foremost, we want to maintain trust with our staff. You know, we have, as I mentioned, over 2,000 folks that have been furloughed. They're waiting to hear when we can bring people back to work. They're waiting to hear how they can contribute to help serve the mission they feel so strongly about. And so our goal is to make sure that they are well informed about what we know as best as we can inform them. And so we're making sure that, you know, be in touch with them at least on a weekly basis through multiple channels. But we also really do value the guidance and trust of our board. And, you know, through these tough times, you have to make decisions very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that we're keeping the board well informed so that when we come to them with a decision, they trust that we're making the right choices.
Yeah. And Denise, so there's a lot of noise right now around the issue of reopening, when to do it, how to do it, how you balance the needs of the community with the safety of your staff. Can you share a little bit into how you're thinking about making that decision?
Yeah, it is not an easy decision. I think for us is that the safety of everyone we're responsible for is the most important decision that we had to make, is that from the staff, from our members, to the kiddos that we serve, that we want to ensure that we have clear business protocols and expectations in place. And when our staff return, when our doors reopen, that we have, you know, we base it out on research and science and what the guidelines and guidance from our government agencies is suggesting. And so if we cannot be certain that we can easily protect the safety of the people we're responsible for, we will not reopen. And that's like the most important decision. So we plan our reopening in phases, and it's a phased approach. And I'd say the first phase is our current planning phase. Is you know, we wanted to make sure that there are, while we are all stay at home, that there are virtual programming to support the needs of our families and children while they're at home. And we create, you know, immediately after we closed, that we created a website called Y on the Go, where there are family activities and also fitness activity classes to allow, you know, our families to stay active at home. You know, we also wanted to make sure that, you know, during this phase, we support our families during this critical time, from providing essential items, from food to face masks to laptops to meals, so that they can get through this stage. And you know, and also, you know, during this planning phase is how do we take care of our facilities and also plan for the future. So really from, you know, our furniture, making sure they're scrubbable, to make sure that all our plumbing services, plumbing fixtures needs to be touchless, so that when people return, they get a sense of safety in our locations. So I think that's a phase one, is really taking care of this times when they're not when we're closed. How do we make sure that we reinstate this, you know, the Y is still here for them and we're protecting them when they return. Phase two is immediately when we return. I earlier talked about we are in the, you know, stay-at-home phase right now for the state of Illinois. You know, normally, you know, summertime is a fun time for our children, and you know, our summer camp usually start at the end of May in some of the locations. And And we know that kids are already missing quite a bit in the second half of the school year. And so it's really important for our kids to continue to have a meaningful summer experience. So that's why we're planning to have a free virtual summer camp experience for all of our kids until we can be in person. And we're also moving all of our specialty camp activities into online experience so that even kids that cannot be with us can also enjoy the summer experience. We are planning to offer in-person summer camp and starting as early as June 15, of course, pending, the state's guidance. And, we are doing all the necessary preventative measures to make sure when the kids are back that we are, making sure that not only they have a wonderful camp experience and, also support them with some of the academic loss that they have had in the second half of the year, but also making sure they're safe. In terms of from a membership center perspective, we are also taking in a phased approach. Right now we're planning opening as early as July 1st, and with also soft opening in a couple of our locations to really test out our new protocols and our training procedures to make sure we're ready when the people are returning. And then the phase 3, which is the last phase is what the new normal is going to look like. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody knows what the new normal is going to look like, but it is important for us to plan. And one of the things that we're planning is working with our all the school administrators to understand what the next school year is going to look like and how's the Y going to be there to support them no matter what they are going to, what the school is going to look like. We know for a fact that, school is not going to look like what it was before school closed, back in January, February. And so, how school is going to readjust, the Y wants to be there to partner with them to do that.
Yeah. So I'm a trustee of the DC Public Library System, and we've also scrambled and tried to do a number of tests and new models for trying to keep providing services. And there, as we think about the return, there are things I know that will never be the same about how a public library operates. I'm curious from your perspective at the Y, if you have clarity kind of in your crystal ball about changes that will be permanent, either in new services or in services that you can't foresee being able to offer in the same way anymore moving forward. Any permanent changes?
I don't know. I think I don't know what when what permanent looks like, right? Because I really do think like what we are hearing from our families is that they are yearning for that sense of social connectiveness that the Y has for a long time giving them. And I think for a fact that is something the Y will continue to stay. What we are not sure is that, if the school will ever going to have 36 kids in a classroom ever again. And if that's not going to be the case, and if they will have to adjust to some kind of hybrid models in terms of learning, or the schedule will change, then the Y would have to necessarily, pivot in terms of continue to support them. And so I think those are the things that, I think for when we return, the sense of social, like the social distancing is still going to be very important for people. And so we know that our class size is going to look different. And we know that, how we're going to offer swim program is going to look different. And, but what we don't know is that going to stay like that 6 months from now, a year from now, and I don't think that it's too soon for us to say that.
Can you give us a sense of the scale, either of you? Like, so pre-COVID, how many locations do you have on a typical, I don't know, day, or over the course of a typical year? How many people are accessing your services?
And so we have over 120,000 people that are active in the Y that we serve in the Chicagoland area across 6 counties. And that includes our membership centers where you would typically find the fitness and healthy living operations, as well as our early childhood and after school settings. And then we have scores of other locations throughout the city and suburbs where we're serving in schools, park districts, faith-based organizations. And so, we have many of those as well. And what's yet to be determined is, what that footprint's going to look like after this is all over.
Yeah. Dick, you mentioned earlier the importance of just communicating with your board so that they're not surprised by anything, or that they just are kept apprised of all the decisions that are underway, and or what you see out in the future. What is their role beyond that? Sort of beyond, like, are they playing an external facing role in any of your advocacy efforts, or and what else can a board be doing in this moment?
Well, as you can imagine, our board meets in a formal way every 5 times a month. We have committee meetings, of course, in between those 5 big meetings. But more recently, we've been meeting a lot more. As we look at the financial situation that we're in, and we're looking at ways to raise funds to bridge the difference, they're really more active, and they're providing us great advice, guidance, and information. We're also connecting us to the community where there are needed services. So that part's been very, very helpful, and we think that'll continue well into the future.
And what about your volunteers, right? I mean, I think WISE, along with many other organizations, depend on volunteers for just that extra secret sauce, or sometimes for the critical sauce, right? The thing that makes your work sing. How are you managing your volunteers in this moment?
That's a tough one because, they have a stay-at-home order too, right? And so we have our staff who's not able to be there, and our volunteers can't either. But it's amazing, and Denise can talk to some of this, where volunteers have popped up and made masks for folks. We're going to be partnering with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Medline soon to hand out over 100,000 masks with other partners. We're doing other things in providing food delivery to folks who are not able to get out of the house. And Denise might have some other examples, but it's been somewhat limited, but where they can in this environment, they're anxious to help.
I'd like to encourage our attendees to keep asking questions in the Q&A box if you have them. So you're very facilities dependent, right? And I'm just curious how you think of your physical plant. I mean, Denise mentioned just the importance of, obviously, as you consider reopening, cleanliness and the protocols and procedures around that. What do you see as the role now future facing in terms of facilities like this as community anchors, given people's anxieties around being in facilities? Do you have a thought on where that's going?
Well, you talked about trust before, and I think what members and or the people we serve want to know is, can they trust the Y to keep their children safe? Can they trust the Y to keep them safe? And so we're going to great lengths to make sure that we are demonstrably changing our environment. When you walk in the door, it's safe. You can see it around. You can smell the cleanliness. You can see it everywhere you go. As Denise mentioned, we're changing out furniture. So some of the soft-sided furniture we're getting rid of. We're going to have cleanable, wipeable furniture. And maybe for a while we won't have any furniture while we're trying to socially distance. And right away we're not going to have access to any locker rooms. Over time, and we're going to transition to touchless faucets and those sorts of things, so that people can remain safe. And so we know the world is changing for facilities, and we know that we'll have to keep kids socially distant as well as they engage with the counselors in summer camp, as they engage with our staff in the centers. And we just have to be always listening to the people who we're serving to make sure they are comfortable over time.
Yeah. And what about folks coming into your buildings? Will there be any kind of screening? Do you envision screening of folks as they come into the buildings as well as your team? And
Maybe Denise, you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, we do expect that both there's a protocol for both the staff, our members, and our kids that are coming to the Y, that they will have a temperature screening. They're also in the public area, more common areas. They're required to wear masks at least immediately. When we reopen, and so there are lists of procedures that we are putting in place to make sure that the people that are coming into the Y will not only they are safe, but they also feel safe and feel like the Y is really taking all the efforts to keep them safe.
Yeah,
we'll break at certain times of the day and just clean up.
Yeah,
make sure that we're wiping down, sanitizing every area, every surface, so that people know that when they're there, they can feel like it's a safe environment.
Yeah. And given the reach of your again network across, you said seven counties?
6 counties, yeah, 6 counties throughout Chicagoland.
And so the range of, I'm sure that COVID has hit each of these counties in a different way. Have you differentiated your plan, or do you have a uniform plan, like for city versus the suburban centers?
Well, most of our communities are close enough to the city of Chicago. We're pretty much within the same sector, if you will, in terms of the reopening plan. And we intend to probably have a phased reopening. It's based on capacity and making sure that we're doing it the right way across our network. We probably will be in the same phase throughout in terms of the 5 phases that Denise talked about in terms of being able to reopen. We'll probably all be subject to the same rules and protocols.
Yeah. And so depending on your own kind of, in terms of your members, the stages and ages and needs, that you think of the Y in different ways. So some people think of it in terms of fitness centers, other people absolutely rely on it for childcare. How do you balance those, if you will, competing interests, or how do you deal with that in terms of the prioritization of what services will be available when?
Well, first and foremost, it's going to be summer camp. I think, parents and children both they need it. They really do. They've told us that they want it. So we're really going to focus on the kids first. We also want to make sure that families are well served. We serve the community in so many different ways and so many different times of the day. And we're going to be able to day part certain parts of the day, so that seniors can be there when they want to be there, that kids will be there when it's appropriate, and that health-seeking adults will be there to have their workout or what have you. But because many of our facilities are large enough, and we're open for a big part of the day, we think we'll be able to find a way to accommodate everybody.
Great. So this has upended things. The media reports understandably focus on the number of cases of folks becoming ill, the number of deaths, and there's a lot about this that has touched folks in ways that understandably are sad, right, and depressing. And I'm curious, without diminishing that, because that has been that's very real. Is there anything that's come out of this experience that that you see as a positive?
I think there are so many things. I'll start with the funders in our community. United Way, Chicago Community Trust, the McCormick Foundation, our board members, people who are going out of their way to make it easy for us to access resources. They know that we're busy. They know that we're occupied serving the need in Chicago. And they're saying, how can we help? Can we provide the resources you need to serve that immediate need? And they've made it really easy for us to do that. I say it's also, we do have a cadre of people still working here at the Y who are serving some of this need. So for example, in our shelter space, we're taking in hundreds of people every day into our YMCAs. And for all our staff knows, these could be COVID positive people. And and yet they're there every day, showing up to work, not asking for anything more than what they've been offered, and they're loyal and they're doing their jobs every day. We have many families in the community who are under-resourced in their own right. So, give you an example of a mother in one of our communities that is touched by crime and violence, and now it's been, visited with this terrible disease. We had a mother who was new to Chicago, had no family, and she was a brand new mother with an infant. She had no way to leave her place. And so our staff, in their own volition, made sure that they went to her house, made sure that she had food, diapers, formula, everything she needed to get through. And they did this probably putting themselves in, at great peril. But they do this because they feel the mission of the Y and the need to serve the community. And that really reflects, we think, the entire base of employees that work for the Y. We're so very gratified that they are with us, and that soon they'll be back with us in the fold.
And I would add to what Dick say that, another thing that is really as a positive is, how different organizations and institutions that have, maybe, a normal time seems like very different, sometimes maybe competing priorities, come together and really tap into each other's strengths and resources to support the overall broader needs of the community. And, and another thing that it really gives me hope is that, seeing while people are physically more isolated than ever, that there is a really, a greater sense of community that we have never seen before. And, that is that sense of community that we're going to need for us, to rebuild, and they talk a little bit about the staff and, our staff and our members and our families are resilient, and because of this resiliency that we see how every day people adapt into the change and wanting something better for not just themselves but the greater good of the community. So I would say those are some of the positive and hopeful signs that I'm seeing during this crisis.
Yeah. So we've got another question just around the challenges around fundraising and how many fundraising events have had to be canceled. And I wonder if you might just comment on how do you recover from those losses?
Well, yeah, there have been a number that have canceled. We have a big one coming in October, which seems a long time away, but these days we know that people are looking that far out. We've already decided to recommend to our board that we shift that into a virtual platform. And we do know that, this is, again, back to the surprising things of people here in Chicago. They are very generous. We have a generous community here in Chicago. And we already know that other nonprofits that have gone to a virtual platform have met or exceeded what they would have done in person. And so we're fortunate to be in this community of such broad shoulders, but also generous people. And we're hopeful that those kinds of virtual platforms can be as effective as in-person platforms.
So, this has been certainly my first global pandemic. I imagine the first for most folks, and a lot of debate around whether we collectively in all sectors and quarters of the world, whether we were as prepared as we should have been, without trying to play Monday morning quarterback on that particular question. I'm curious how this experience from a leadership perspective has maybe shaped how you will approach from a future facing perspective, what it means to be prepared for the unknown.
Yeah, it's a great question, really good one. I think about that a lot. I first think about what's happening in our city and with the mayor and the governor of Illinois, and I have to give them props for doing such a great job. They've been aligned. They've really worked well together, and they have reached out to the nonprofit community in a way that's really inclusive. And so from that perspective, that gets me to think that could I be doing more in conjunction with the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, to prepare ourselves better for the next time? Because while, it was very supportive, it was also very crazy in the early days. I think also internally, we now have a much better idea of how you have to be more prepared. And so we didn't do the tabletop exercise maybe we needed to do. Who knew that a pandemic was coming? But I think we're going to be much better prepared going forward.
Yeah. Denise, anything you would add in terms of how you maybe will think differently about what it means to be prepared?
No, I think, Dick captured everything that, I don't think there's, unfortunately, I don't think there's a whole lot we can, we could have prepared for, but it does, give us an opportunity to pivot as an organization and, really think about what is needed for the future to support the communities better.
Yeah. So just one last question. I'm just curious if there's anything else that we haven't touched on that keeps you up at night or wakes you up early in terms of, what it means to be a nonprofit leader.
Well, I would just say, going back to the idea that, I think as an organization, we have to get the federal government to understand how important nonprofits are going to be in the aftermath of the immediate and urgent, infection. I think we're going to see unemployment. We're going to see families coming apart in some respects. We're going to see individual needs of people, whether it be food or counseling, mental health, togetherness. Those are kind of things are going to be necessary. And this has punched nonprofits in the gut. It really has. And we're all going to be hard pressed to come back out of it the way we went into it. I think, as I said before, we're very fortunate to have a bunch of other cohorts across the country with the Y network to help and provide some support. But locally, we know it's going to be a challenge. And so we're looking for, federal, state, and local support.